I'm going to use foresight. This is a foresight or futures informed project that I'm sharing with you. My master's degree was a master design in strategic foresight and innovation. We were trained in futures thinking, which is a real discipline, if you can believe it. I didn't believe it before I did the program. We were trained to use some specific kinds of skills to try and describe the future. One of the rules, if you ever meet a futurist and they're predicting the future, then they're not a real futurist. Futurists describe the future. And in fact, they describe futures. They describe potential futures that might come to pass. And then by thinking richly about what those futures might be, we can inform our decisions in the present. So we're going to be using some of those foresight-informed ideas in this workshop today. I'm going to present what I think are the three realities of assessing and evaluating students in an age of AI. We're going to be talking about that spectrum that's in the headline of the session. And then the last thing is I'm open to collaborating on this work. I'm really keen to sort of advance this narrative. I think we've got some new things to talk about. And so as you get into it, if there's something you want to work on with me, then like by all means reach out. I'd love to chat. I just want to begin though with a quick land acknowledgement. I'd like to respect and acknowledge that the territories we're all living and working on were stewarded by Indigenous peoples, especially in the island of Newfoundland, the Mi'kmaq, and the Beothuk. And so to that end, I actually wanted to flag an interesting project that intersects indigenization and reconciliation and, well, indigenization, I guess, and AI. So this is some work written up by Karen Howe in the MIT Tech Review, but there's a really interesting Maori project in New Zealand that's used radio transcripts, radio recordings of the Maori language, and they have crowdsourced a collection of Maori audio and Maori text, and they're using it in order to train their own model so that they can try and recover and capture the language that is otherwise being erased, right? And so it's not all dystopian. I've read a lot of sci-fi. I cannot believe we're where we are. And so it's really easy to sort of lose all hope when you start thinking too much about this AI stuff and a variety of other things going on in the world. But I love this story. It's an Indigenous-led project. It's just a fascinating tale of a local small-scale radio station and some researchers that are connecting and making something powerful happen. So I just wanted to celebrate that in recognition of indigenization and reconciliation. So with that, what are these things? If we're talking about AI, how do they work? Let's make sure we're all on the same page. This slide was much more necessary a year and a half ago when I first started up thinking about and talking these things. Nowadays, I think we're all kind of on the same page, but it's really important to be on the exact same page. So there's a bunch of different terms that are used to describe this technology. AI is the most popular one, although it is horrendously, I think, the wrong term. Large language models are the text-based models that we work with, chatbots, generative tech, machine learning, etc. There's a variety of different ways of talking about this. The way that I like to think about it is that it is generative tech. It is technology that generates things for us in a way that we don't have to be involved. So this is this is a way of seeing this technology as an iterative step up from many of the technologies we had before. And it avoids this idea of intelligence because, as I will argue, these things are not that intelligent. And this is an old snippet now, but it uses GPT-4. This is a user trying to get GPT-4 to repeat the string DavidJL. And so the user says, repeat the string DavidJL, the exact text space DavidJL, and the chatbot. This is ChatGPT-4, super advanced in terms of LLMs. Repeated JNDL. Okay, how many letters are in this username? The username JDNL contains 4 letters. Like it is just completely mixing this stuff up. And this is a wacky story. It turns out that the main reason for this is because DavidJL was a major participant in a subreddit, a Reddit community dedicated to simply counting numbers because that's what people do with their time. And so DavidJL has had a lot of contributions to the data set that was used to train ChatGPT. And so as a result, because DavidJL's name shows up next to numbers in all kinds of places in the data set, it just had no ability to talk about this stuff, to talk about this text exactly in a precise way, the same way that you or I could. And so this just like really underscores just how these things are not intelligent, they are not agentic, and yet they are super powerful. but they are ultimately probabilistic generators of text, right? Given some string, what probably will come after this string based on what a big, huge training data set, a bunch of data labeling that's happened, and then injected with a little bit of randomness to make it interesting. So that's ultimately what these things are, is they're generative, and that can be an interesting, valuable thing, and it can be problematic, as we all know. One thing to highlight here is the from the internet part. One of the things that I want to underscore whenever I talk about AI or generative tech is that from the internet piece is generally true. Whenever we're talking about these things, we are generally talking about ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude, a variety of these models that are, yes, trained on the internet. They're drawing from the internet. They're using the internet when we talk to them. Perplexity is another popular search engine that is like very internet based. However, one of the things that I think we really need to be aware of in education and academia is retrieval augmented generation. And this is tools like NotebookLM out of Google that is focused on taking a specific corpus of text. So you supply a bunch of things to this model, and then when you do, it draws specifically from that content. And so it's not coming straight from the internet. It's not coming from this huge pile of things. It can actually take from things that aren't on the internet, and it can be very specific about how it cites things. And I'm going to show you some examples of that in this work. I just want to pause there. That underscores what I'm talking about, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. These things are not intelligent, but they are potentially very useful, very interesting, and certainly they're very good at plagiarism and cheating, which is why this is such a hot topic in academia. So, as I mentioned, this is foresight informed. In foresight, one of the things that we do is environmental scanning. We simply watch, we might search, or we simply look and watch what's happening in the world. We identify events that are signals of change. We collect and collate and find and analyze those signals. So it might be a headline, as I'll show you some examples in a bit, actually. It might be a headline that says something about, one of the examples I'll use later is, it seems like models are hitting a scaling wall, so we might not be able to train them much more than we already have. That's a pretty powerful signal, like that's coming out from some pretty informed people, and so that is an indication of a potential trend of change in the world. So we combine signals, or we analyze signals in order to find trends. We identify out of those trends some uncertainties. And an uncertainty exists when it's not clear whether the trend is going to go one way or another. And when we combine uncertainties along with these trends and drivers, we can develop rich scenarios of the future. And so with that in mind, this work is based on a total of 21 different trends. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but things like AI tools are being used to generate fake content, for instance, or AI is developing multimodal abilities, so it's able to sort of have vision and to be able to create vision, create video, etc. So there's a variety of different trends that informed this work, and this is the part that I'm making a lot faster from the work that I presented at the Teaching and Learning Conference. From these trends, I identified a couple of critical uncertainties, and from those developed some possible scenarios of what the future looks like in academia for generative tech. So one uncertainty, starts on one end with appreciated and rewarded. So generative technology is appreciated and rewarded. The use of this technology in this potential future is appreciated and rewarded. The other end of that spectrum is, of course, is that it's unacceptable and it's viciously punished. In fact, I've read that some people, I've seen it written as a critique of a work that it looks like it could have been generated by AI, right? So that's AI is becoming a bit of a punchline in some worlds. So that's one way in which this is manifesting. And then on the other end of that spectrum, where AI use or generative tech use is appreciated and rewarded, there are people out there who, for instance, in programming communities, say, I cannot believe you are not using AI to autocomplete your code. It is ridiculous, right? So we're seeing both of those realities exist in the same time. And that creates a paradox, it creates uncertainty. We can play with that to develop some scenarios. So that scenario I call the acceptability, or that critical uncertainty I call the acceptability spectrum. The other one is where AI either becomes, or generative tech. See, I've gotten used to using AI too much too. One end of the other critical uncertainty that I'm going to draw out here is that AI on one end of the spectrum becomes ubiquitous and easy to use. And so that is the popularity that what speaks to that is the popularity of things like ChatGPT and how we've started to use that the same way we use Kleenex to refer to tissues. ChatGPT has become this commonplace term. We think of it the same way we think of Google, we think of Kleenex, yet it's actually just a single brand and a single product of a much broader thing. So these models might become, or these tools might become ubiquitous and easy to use. And on the other end of this spectrum, and believe it or not, this is a real possibility, the powerful ways of using these tools become exclusive and difficult to take advantage of. And so we're seeing, for instance, in businesses that have a huge corpus of specific proprietary data nobody else has access to. Let's say a pharmaceutical company is training a model to try and wrap their head around how to fold proteins in a certain specific way. I don't know, I'm not a pharmacist, but we can imagine that there are groups of users out there or individuals out there who have developed really specific ways of using these tools, generative tech, really, really powerfully, and that makes it exclusive to use those tools in that way. So that's the other end of this ubiquitous and easy to use spectrum, and I called that one the exclusivity spectrum. So we have these two critical uncertainties, and what we get when you put two critical uncertainties against each other is one of the consultant's favorite little things, a 2x2 matrix, and that gives us four different scenarios. So on one of these scenarios, and when you combine exclusivity and acceptability such that AI is exclusive and difficult to take advantage of, and unacceptable and viciously punished, or sorry, I'm mixing up my memorized order here. Let's say we have a future emerge where AI is appreciated and rewarded, and it's ubiquitous and easy to use. You might say that this is extremely likely. I don't know. Well, this is what we try not to do in futures work. But in this scenario, AI is everywhere. It's inescapable. And this is certainly, remember, this work was developed about a year ago. This is certainly seeming to come to pass. And I'm going to show another example of this in a little while. But generative tech is built into laptops now. It's it's getting built into the modern versions of Android and iOS. It does seem to be becoming ubiquitous and seeming to show up everywhere. Nonetheless, let's explore these other scenarios to see what they might involve. So if you go to the opposite end of these two spectrums, where AI is exclusive and difficult to take advantage of, and it's unacceptable and viciously punished, we might get a world in which AI is a bootleg technology. It's run the same way if you were, looking for music about 20 years ago, and you were trying to find digital music so you could put it on your MP3 player. You were either purchasing things on iTunes, or many people were using things like LimeWire and other kinds of piracy tools, right? And so that world, there was a whole subset of people who knew their way around it wasn't the dark web at the time, but who knew their way around these sites that were full of ads and scams and phishing attempts to phish you, and they could find the bootleg data that they wanted, the bootleg media they wanted, and download that. There is a possible future out there where that becomes the norm for how we use generative tech, because it's so sort of pushed under the rug. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's not high quality output. And so instead we get this world in which people specifically get good at using specific kinds of tools, but they hide it and they don't talk about it. And I'll talk about this with a couple practical examples in a little bit. So that's the other end of the AI everywhere spectrum, is a bootleg AI scenario. A third is that AI is simply a joke. It's everywhere, but it's unacceptable and it's viciously punished. So if you say, "Oh yeah, I wrote this paper's abstract with AI," the editors just automatically sort of reject you. It doesn't matter if it's valid work. It doesn't matter if it's just summarizing what you've done before. They just don't want to see it whatsoever. It's just a signal that the rest of the work is low quality. So that's that third scenario. And then the fourth one is a world of AI experts, where it is appreciated and rewarded to use AI tools. It's appreciated and rewarded, but it's actually difficult to make the most of this work. And so we get consultants who are good at prompting. We get businesses that, again, use that lake of proprietary data, that warehouse of proprietary data, to make something really special happen with their modeling tools, etc. And so that's that fourth scenario. So in each of these, I've developed a bit of an example of what it might look like in research. So if we, I'm mixing up what I spoke about at the Teaching Learning Conference versus here. Let's not get into those examples. I can come back to them and bring them up if somebody wants to. So under this context, we've got these four scenarios. What the question nonetheless across all of them, and this is one of the neat things about futures, is that by exploring these alternative futures, we still see what all of them have in common. And no matter what, across all of these, we want to be able to design and evaluate assessments in a way that acknowledges the truth of what it looks like to work with AI. So one of the things that this scenario matrix shows is that this future is inescapable, and I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about how inescapable it is in a little bit. But this is fundamentally the question I'm trying to explore and answer in my own pedagogy is how should we be designing assessments in a way that allows all of these futures to come to pass and have my assignments and assessments still be resilient and powerful and useful and help students learning outcomes, appreciating all of these possible futures. So that's where we are. So let me build from that work with a few other signals and trends that I've picked up since I developed those 4 scenarios. And I think these really underscore the value or the inescapability, as I just described it, how this stuff is showing up and it's not going away. And so one of the first ones I mentioned, retrieval augmented generated text earlier, retrieval augmented generation, RAG. One of the signals that I'm picking up is that tools like Notebook LLM, which is a Google product that allows you to insert a variety of different resources and then query and work with that model in the context of those resources. I think that RAG-based text is going to become very, very prolific. We're going to be able to take all of our course notes, for instance. There's no reason you can't do this already. If you're in a course and you've got a professor who's provided a variety of different PDF readings and a variety of different slides, you just throw all of those into a notebook, what Notebook calls a notebook, which creates a context that's specifically scoped around that course. And then you can produce text and produce writing that speaks exactly to the resources in that course in a way that is completely genuine. It's not hallucinating nearly as much as a regular sort of internet-based tool might. And so this kind of tool, if it again grows, and think back to that bootleg AI scenario, if the clever students figure out how to use it, then it's going to be able to, it's going to be really efficient to be able to use that to produce really authentic, really good looking text for any of the work that we might need them to do in our courses. And so this, for instance, is an output from, and I didn't realize it's a wall of text. This is output from Notebook LM. I gave Notebook LM the strategic plan, the Transforming Our Horizons strategic plan, the Grenfell strategic plan, and the 3 most recent scorecards, the 3 most recent reports from the president and the board of governors of the institution, board of regents, sorry. And you'll note that there's no ChatGPT-e's in this paragraph, and it correctly cites the sources that I supplied. I also gave it some strategy resources, Kaplan and Norden's work on the balanced scorecard, because that's roughly what our current approach faces. So it's drawing directly from the work and the writing and the style of these documents, and it produces this statement, this summary of what's happening that is, again, if you thought that other kinds of ChatGPT output was easy to recognize, you should be able to see that this is actually a lot harder, right? It's in context writing that is really, really sort of clean to the specific documents you're trying to talk about. So it becomes harder to pick up on these things and catch them. So that's one trend. Another one is that tech companies are setting up consumers to use AI by default. This is no surprise to most of us, but let's just underscore it. If you search Google now, you're getting AI summaries at the top right away. They're just there. If you use Microsoft Word, Copilot is built into it. There are GPT tools that are, or LLM tools that are writing with you right away. And the latest version of iOS on iPhones and iPads and Mac OS is going to have Apple Intelligence built in, which also has all of these tools. And what Apple is doing is actually they're doing some internal work. So it doesn't work just like the models we're used to. It doesn't generate hallucinated content right away, but it has a forward built into ChatGPT. So they'll actually outsource to ChatGPT if you opt into that possible feature straight from the operating system. So these things are built into the tools that we use every day. Got a cough, sorry. Okay. So that's a second trend. A third one, sorry, to build on that, I said consumers, but actually these are our next students, right? So we have 15, 16, 17-year-olds right now who are using these tools as it's how they were introduced to computers. So there was a headline a couple of years ago about how modern students don't know how to find a file on their desktop, right? And they're so used to a search interface that there's just this like generative generation-based difference between who the students who grow up, me, I'm talking about me, growing up using computers, knowing that a computer is full of files, and you file those files away in folders, and you find them that way. Again, there was this big headline a couple years ago that said students now don't know how to find a file. So if you get an intro to whatever course, an intro to physics course, and you tell students that you got to download a package to run a simulation, you actually have to explain files to them as well, in some cases. And so this is going to bring another of these sort of generation-based differences. I think the students that are coming up over the next few years who are going to start their university careers in the next few years are going to have these tools built into everything they've ever used. So it has some really powerful implications for exactly how they relate to a lot of the topics that we're going to be dealing with as educators. The third trend is it's not okay to use AI is actually a cultural value. We've got to recognize that. It's easy for many educators who, again, grew up without this default. If I go back without this default, we all grew up without this default. The idea that AI is maybe a bad thing is kind of obvious to us. But this is a cultural value, and it might change over time. And the companies that are hawking these tools certainly want us to do that. So this is an advertisement on the left from Evernote on Facebook. Look at what it says. It says it's not illegal to use this AI app to write your college papers. This is how Evernote was doing its advertising just a couple months ago. On the right is a Reddit post. I was the exact same as this person, username ArchStanton75. I was telling students that Grammarly doesn't have any AI tools built into it, not generative tools. It was grammar checking, and I am wrong about that. Now, I just saw an ad on YouTube the other day. Grammarly has all the same rewrite, outline type tools built into it. And so even though they had that sort of identity that we're just helping you find the errors in your writing, that's actually not true. They're now starting to do the generative thing as well. And so, again, this idea that this is not wrong is something that we believe, but that's a cultural belief. It's not necessarily one that's made obvious. And so it's going to be harder and harder to convince people and to help people recognize when the use of these tools might be unethical or illegal. So we need to get good at it. The fourth trend is that people will get better at using these tools. ChatGPT just 2 weeks ago published this outline on a student's guide to writing with ChatGPT. They aren't necessarily trying to be too villainous with this. It doesn't include, for instance, insert your assignment text, and then we'll generate the answer for you. It has guides on how to think and how to use these tools to think better about your course content. So it's not all the pure evil. Nonetheless, it's training people to get better at it, right? There's an implication directly in the fact that this resource exists. And we've probably, most of us in the audience have probably seen prompt crafting and prompt engineering. There's a skill to it. But again, if these tools are built into everything we use, that skill is going to be something that people are going to get naturally better at just through practice alone, especially if they grow up using these tools. So that's the fourth. I don't think I've lost track. The fifth is that model performance might be reaching a limit. This might be a fortune thing for those of us that are a little bit skeptical of these tools, but we're seeing shifts in how these companies are working, the way they're building their products. The rate of training seems to be slowing down, or not the rate of training, but the rate of improvement with respect to how much training data they're providing seems to be slowing down. Models aren't necessarily just getting better at a linear rate, which is, oddly enough, one of the things that most of the founders and CEOs of these companies want us to believe, that we're going to have these like immensely powerful, infinitely powerful tools by a couple of years from now. That doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't seem to be the case that we can just shove more text into these and have them get better. And so therefore there is this potential slowdown happening on how much better these tools can get at generating text and at doing reasoning, or coming up with creative things. And yet model-based software is getting more capable. So there's a double edge to this one. So to speak to that, and I think I'm sharing audio, so hopefully this is going to work. So I've got a little...
Welcome to this deep dive, everyone.
Yeah.
Today, we are going to be looking at Memorial University's
so
performance
Sounds good.
based on their strategic goals, and also we'll see how they stack up against some similar universities, both here in Canada and around the world.
Sounds like a plan.
Perfect.
Ah.
So you've given us a few things to work with here. We've got the 2023 Performance Measurement Dashboard. Grenfell Campus has their strategic plan committing to communities. It runs from 2019 to 2024.
Okay.
And then the main strategic plan for Memorial University, which is called Transforming Our Horizons from 2021 to 2026.
Okay.
And one thing that I noticed right off the bat is that Grenfell's strategic plan actually runs longer than Memorial's main strategic plan.
That's a great observation, and it really kind of highlights that Grenfell campus, while it is part of Memorial University, really operates with its own kind of distinct, localized strategic plan. And so that's really demonstrating that they're committed to addressing the specific needs and opportunities that are presented in Western Newfoundland.
So it's like a plan within a plan. We're dealing with both the university-wide goals and then the more localized ones for Grenfell.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense given its location.
So I'll pause it there. That was not two real people. If you're not familiar with Notebook LM, this is a podcast produced by that tool that I've described. Again, I gave it our strategic plan for the university, transforming our horizons, the Grenfell strategic plan, some resources on how balanced scorecards are created and used, and the strategic scorecards from the past few years from the president's office and the Board of Regents. That was a podcast, a half-hour long podcast produced by Notebook LM, just discussing, I think they specifically asked it to discuss how the university is performing over time. And if I'd let it keep running, it gets into an analysis of each of those, produced, again, as if it was a conversation between two real people. So the signal, or the trend that speaks to is that model-based software is getting more capable, right? If we previously had an assignment in our classes that we thought would have been bulletproof for this, where we ask people to record a lecture or something, right? You can't really get around that anymore either, because model voice production is very realistic, and they can draw from context. That retrieval augmented generation, producing audio as if it's a conversation between two different people. And then the last thing that I have here, and I think it's going to play the audio again. So just,
welcome to this deep dive, everyone.
But if you look
Today,
in the background
we are
here,
going to be looking at Memorial University's performance.
Sounds good.
This
Based
is not
on
a
their
real person
strategic
here either.
goals, and also
So the
we'll see
video
how they
produced
stack up
following
against some
text. So a company called synesthesia.ai is producing video that follows the text that you generate, where there's a talking head speaking to it. So again, the capabilities of these tools are getting quite powerful, even if they're hitting a wall in terms of how much we can train them. The last trend that I want to highlight is that winning this arms race actually might require introducing inequities in the way that we challenge students. And so to speak to that one, I have a more personal reflection. Many of the ways that we get around some of these tools is to ask people to handwrite in class. So this is a sample of my handwriting. You're not supposed to, I don't know why I chose something that says you are going to die. I was in an accident. This is from a number of years ago. I had to pull a notebook off my shelf, and I just flipped to a random page. Is from a guest lecturer, Ian Clark, that was saying that. I don't know what the context is at all. I can't remember it. But the point is, my handwriting is terrible. And it's not just terrible. I have a diagnosis of dysgraphia, right? And so when we ask a student like me to sit down and handwrite something in class, the truth is that even if you give me an extra 50% time or whatever, the way that I think, I type at 130 words per minute. I can race anybody if you want me to. I can take that challenge. I type at 130 words per minute. I write it maybe like 30, right? And therefore, the way that I think when I'm typing is just vastly different from the way that I think when I'm writing, and in a way that I'm not comfortable with. So asking a student to avoid the ChatGPT, the risk of ChatGPT cheating, asking a student to sit down and write actually introduces potential inequities where students are not working the way that they're used to. And that has some really powerful implications for the way that we design our learning outcomes and how they connect in terms of constructive alignment to the actual tasks that we use to assess those learning outcomes. So that was a bit of a whirlwind. I think the ultimate goal was just to, again, ground this stuff in foresight, ground this stuff in the trends and where we're seeing this go. And I did base this as well in some work on trying to figure out what literature has said about generative AI assessments and evaluations. And unfortunately, I'm just going to skip over a lot of that because where we are is that we still have a number of open research questions about how this stuff should work. This is obvious, again, if you're working and thinking about this stuff. But just to underscore it, nobody really has answers to any of these big topics that are here. And especially nobody has great answers to how exactly we integrate AI in assessment. So as far as I can tell anyway, there aren't great answers already written out there. There's a bunch of different work that's happening, but it's all very much in progress. So that's where we are. And so that leaves us with these four scenarios, with this inevitable, inescapable future. and the question of how should educators be designing and evaluating assessments in an age of generative tech. And so there are two underpinnings to that future. The first is that I think we're going to lose this arms race. These tools are only going to grow more capable, even if it's not going to be through data and training. Products are going to get better. They're going to get more multimodal. The technology is going to get smaller and cheaper. Another trend that I should have highlighted is perhaps the integration of wearables and AI tools, right? Meta is going hard on this partnership with Ray-Ban, right? And so there are now Ray-Ban glasses that look like regular Ray-Ban glasses, but they are actually model-based. They use a little bit of audio, and they can tell you what you're looking at, and that's generative tech built into those glasses. And so are we going to ask students to remove their glasses when they come into an exam just in case they've got a little computer built into them? I don't know. I don't think so. I think we're losing this arms race. So the question is, what do we do about it? And the second underpinning is that generative tech skills will actually be important. That these tools, if they become prolific and they become and they are inevitable, using these tools and being good at using these tools in industry and in academia is going to be important. We're going to need to be able to use these tools and be intelligent about it and use them right, use them ethically, use them efficiently. So these two underpinnings create one responsibility for us, which is that as educators, we have a responsibility to teach and evaluate both against and with generative tech. We need to prove to students, or we need to assess students that students are learning the outcomes that we want them to in our courses, and they're doing that sort of independently of technology. And at the same time, we also need to train them and support them in using these tools in our disciplines, whatever that might mean. So that leaves us with three realities. The first is that policy is insufficient. Again, this work was done about a year ago. That's an age in this industry in the way that these things are moving. At the time, everybody was talking about policy. We need to have Senate rules that say AI can be disallowed. We need to have syllabus text, etc. But policy is ultimately insufficient. We're losing the arms race. Therefore, policy is going to be, a thing that students can ignore and get away from pretty easily. And even though it would be incredibly unethical of them or unethical of them to do. The second reality is that we must learn how to and teach how to use AI. So if these tools are prolific, if they're going to be required for success in our discipline after graduation, we can't ignore the fact that our students need to learn how to use these tools too. And that means that we ultimately also need to learn how to use these tools effectively. And then the third reality is perhaps the most important for this particular lecture or workshop is that we must fundamentally rethink assessments and evaluations with these contexts in mind. How do we deal with conventional or how do we use conventional assessments when the reality of what students are going to be dealing with post-graduation is going to be so different. So this requires a fundamental rethink. So to that end, this is the titular spectrum, the titular with and against AI scale. So there's two ends of the spectrum. You can imagine designing assessments to either prevent the AI use or to promote AI use. And along the spectrum, I've thought of 6 categories. So the first is that an AI-proof assessment or generative tech-proof assessment. This is an assessment in which it is simply impossible to use AI to complete the assignment. So these are broad categories, but we're going to talk about them in a bit more abstract detail later, or a bit more specific detail later. So the first of these categories is that AI is AI-proof. The second is that it's AI inappropriate. AI outputs are only available in inappropriate formats for the submission. So an example of this might be let's say text for a slide show. Again, so this was easier to talk about a year ago when multimodal capability hadn't been so pronounced. But you can imagine asking students to present both a written piece of text and a slide show and a podcast, and it's difficult. Again, it's hard, but not necessarily impossible for AI tools to generate all 3 of those in good synchrony, right? And so that might be a way of getting to an AI inappropriate assessment. An AI resistant assessment is one where over-reliance on AI will simply lead to bad performance. So this one, it might be more obvious if we've graded an essay that was generating hallucinated citations, for instance. If you ask students for a paper and they just used ChatGPT 3 or 3.5 on it, it would produce a paper that was full of falsehoods, right? And so it was easy to catch those. And even if you didn't call it plagiarism to generate those tools or those outputs, even if you didn't call it plagiarism, it would still result in a failing grade because it was using fake citations and it was full of falsehoods, right? So that's an AI resistant assessment. An AI allowed assessment is where you simply take that and flip it. You say, sure, whatever, you can use AI in this tool, but or in this assignment, but if you do, it's not likely to have an effect on performance. And I actually can't think of a good example of what it looks like to have no effect for AI use to have no effect, either improving quality or reducing quality. So we can talk about what that might look like if you've got ideas. The fifth is AI integrated. So this is an assessment or evaluation that leverages AI by design. So for instance, the popular example of this is you ask a student to use AI to review a paper and then review the AI's review, right? And so AI is part of that work. It teaches students how the AI fails. It teaches them a little bit about the actual paper that the AI is reviewing. And then it also gives them some skill in actually producing a review themselves, right? So it's sort of multi-barreled that way. And then finally, AI required. Without AI use, performance will likely suffer. And so an example of this one might be asking students to write an entire book as part of a course, which is kind of unimaginable in terms of reviewing, right? But it's true that you can, as long as you cite or describe the methods effectively, you can write a lot more using AI. And so maybe this is a way of using AI to generate some unique, newly possible assessments in a course. And I don't know if it would ever be a great kind of assignment. I certainly don't want to read 30 books in order to grade students at the end of a term. But it is an example of what it might look like to require AI use in order to succeed in an evaluation. So that's a spectrum. Yeah,
Oh,
I
I'm
heard.
sorry.
No, that's
I
okay.
apologize.
Yeah.
We do have a question about the spectrum
Thanks.
or so I'll just read it for you just in case you can see it.
No, I didn't.
What I really struggle with is that I can design an assessment anywhere along that spectrum,
Mhm.
but it still seems hard to verify that the student has completed it the way we've supposedly agreed. It's
Mhm.
the distrust issue that really bothers me. I don't want to distrust students by default. What are your thoughts about validation and trust?
Right. Yeah. It's a great question, Jenna. And it's like sort of where I am too, trying to trust students by default, and designing assessments that have, again, I sort of end up in the middle of this spectrum most of the time where I'm designing assessments where they're resistant. So it's pretty obvious that it's pretty obvious when model output is include it's pretty obvious when the student has used model output in their submissions. So that's sort of where I generally end up. And it allows me to sort of, if I'm not speaking super clearly about this, but if I give them clear instructions on what the assessment should look like, and I say what parts of it they can use AI with and what they can't, it gives them, I think I'm screwing this discussion up completely. Let me pause on it. And I've got a slide at the end that I think gets to this a bit better. So I'm sorry I garbled that, but for the teaser, I think you're absolutely right that we should be trusting students by default and designing assessments that have trust built into them is really tough. And I think it requires stepping back a little bit and looking at the whole system that student is working in order to try to find ways of making sure that trust is worthwhile, maybe is the way of putting it. So I'll pause it there, and I'm sure other people have better and more intelligible things to say about it. So we'll try to get through the content so we have time. I'm actually very close to being done. So I'm gonna keep going. Just to flag, I developed this work, and then actually Jana forwarded me along. I think it was from Mark Pico, right? Had flagged this assessment scale publication that came out in about the same time as I developed this other scale. So I got scooped. They had 5 categories, I had 6, so we're not exactly the same, but they presented pretty much the same idea, that there's this a way of thinking about it in terms of a scale from no AI all the way to full AI. So you can look up, it's a great paper. They did a better job of it than I did, I would argue. So it's another way of looking at this. But I think what they're missing, perhaps, if you want to use both, is this idea that there are ways of designing not just AI-proof assessments, because that's what they've articulated in terms of no AI, but there's also ways of designing assessments that are inappropriate or resistant to AI before you go all the way to AI is allowed or integrated or required. So that's a different spectrum that provides or presents something very similar. So the way that I thought we might, and I won't workshop this necessarily, but it gives you something to take away. One way of thinking about this in terms of how to develop assessments. So you've got that spectrum that I just described. You've got learning outcomes that you're trying to get your students to achieve. A classic way of thinking about learning outcomes is Bloom's taxonomy. If you're not familiar, this is what it looks like. And the fundamental idea of Bloom's taxonomy is that there are some simple tasks that we can challenge students to do, like remember something, list the capitals of North America, whatever. That's the remembering base there at the bottom of the Bloom's taxonomy. Understanding is the second layer. So once you start to be able to remember facts, you might be able to interpret those facts. So the fact, maybe an example, I should have prepped one because now I'm going to use geography and I'm probably just going to embarrass myself. But you can explain what a capital is in a country in North America, right? So that's an understanding level on Bloom's taxonomy. Applying it involves actually using that information in a new form, and so discussing discussing why Corner Brook isn't the capital of Newfoundland and Labrador might be a way of applying the idea of a capital in geography. And then as you get higher up in the taxonomy, this diagram puts analyzing, evaluating, creating on the same level. Sometimes it just steps up into analyzing, then to evaluation, then to creating. But you get to ways of taking the information that you're using apart, relating it to other pieces, judging it and critiquing it, and then using it to create something new. So these are, once you've got the ability to remember facts, understand facts, apply facts, you can then start to combine those facts and relate them to others and so on. So it's a way of structuring a learning outcome. And so you can think about how your earlier fundamental learning outcomes are things that show up on the bottom of this taxonomy. And then the higher level outcomes at the end of a course are the things that show up on the top. So that's a brief introduction to Bloom's taxonomy. I'm sure that the people in I'm sure there's people in this session who can speak to it much more intelligently than I can. But there's something interesting that happens when you take that taxonomy, and first of all, you think about what AI is capable of doing on that taxonomy now, or you think about even what AI might be capable of in 3 years. And this is a way of taking your current learning outcomes, thinking about how they fit along Bloom's taxonomy, and then actually asking yourself, well, if I ran each of these through ChatGPT, would I get a satisfiable outcome out of them? And again, you can do that for now, the present day, and you can also do it in 3 years and see if it's going to get worse, if your outcomes are future-proof or not, if your assessments are future-proof or not. And so that's one way of thinking about it. And then this is an version of that. So Vridi Saraf developed a combination or analyzed AI's current cognitive capabilities in 2023 against this. And they suggested that AI was great at recall, so remembering facts. It was great at analyzing, at say taking something that you've given it and developing the relationship between a bunch of different concepts. It was maybe okay at applying information and at creating. But in the cases of creation, as we are all aware, it doesn't come up with anything truly original or creative. It's mostly just copies from templates that it has otherwise. So it tends to follow patterns really closely. And then Vridi also recommended that outcomes on the evaluating and understanding levels were just no-go. So the models just were not capable of those, which is an interesting pattern there. Good, completely bad, maybe not okay, good, not at all okay, and then maybe okay. It's curious that it follows that, and maybe that says something about Bloom's taxonomy. But the point is you can take AI's current tools and your learning outcomes along Bloom's taxonomy and use that as an analysis to see how strong your course is against these tools. And then the other thing that happens is if you take the spectrum that I developed or the one that was developed by the other authors that I mentioned, you can compare them with Bloom's taxonomy and actually fill in a chart here. And so at every single intersection of, say, an AI resistant assignment with every level of Bloom's taxonomy, it's possible to generate an idea of what a learning outcome looks like at that level. And so this is a way of generating a set of learning outcomes that are along Bloom's entire taxonomy and also fit along the AI with and against AI scale at the same time. So for sake of time and conversation, I'm not going to force us to go through this. We can come back to it if people have ideas. But the last thing that I wanted to say to add is to directly address Jana's point. It's worth considering the systems view. Cheating is becoming ever easier. So the real fundamental question is to ask, why do students cheat? What are the issues that are driving a student to rely on these tools that aren't going to become more and more prolific? And so on the right hand of this slide is what's called the iceberg model in systems work. In systems analysis, it's used to get from events at the top to understand what trends and patterns are happening, right? So an event is you've just gotten an assessment. It's clearly generated by ChatGPT. You get the student in to talk about it. The student can't speak to what they submitted whatsoever because they didn't even look. They just asked ChatGPT to generate something and then submitted it. So that's an event. If we're seeing that more and more, then that's a trend or a pattern. And we can start to anticipate and respond to or try to deal with that on a trend level. But what we really want to do is ask what system structure is driving these trends from happening. So why are students so busy that they can't actually sit down and write our assignments? Or why are they perceiving that it might be okay to do that? What are the bigger paradigms that are at play here that drive students to need to perform so well? Like, is there something wrong maybe with the fact that they need to cheat in order to get some level of performance? And what does that mean? So these are completely unanswered questions and deserve a whole lecture series, let alone 3 minutes at the end of a talk. But I just want to underscore that I think this is where we really need to be thinking is why are students cheating? So we can attack this problem from two different angles. One of them is to develop those AI with or against AI assessments. And then the other one is to think about the underlying structures that are driving these problems from for the student. So I'll shift back to that chart and I'll pause there. I'm sure that this was very rapid fire and maybe hard to follow at times, so I apologize for that part. But I thank you for your attention and I'm looking forward to conversation and further emails.
Brian, there are a couple of questions inside of the chat. One person, just for everyone's sake. I teach primarily online at the graduate school level, and the evaluation mechanisms such as case study assignments and term papers are used to determine if they have an in-depth understanding of the material and concepts covered. If students can simply use generative AI to spit out their submission, what are the options for us to identify its use?
Thanks, Jeff. And to speak to that, I also teach graduate schools, or graduate level programming and online. And I just recently developed the course that I'm currently running. So I developed it with all these ideas in mind. And one of the things that I did is I made it very, very anchored. Every single assessment is anchored directly to the real world experiences of students. So of course, people could make these things up, but they generally don't, and it's very obvious that they're not just making up facts about their life. I'm fortunate because I'm teaching in a management program. All of our students have organizational experience. They're working actively with organizations, so they describe what they're doing at these organizations, and then using that to reflect on the concepts that I'm trying to teach in the course. So that's how I've gotten around that particular online issue, is like make it super realistic and super applied, and make sure that they're bringing real world into the content that they're submitting. But in terms of to directly answer that last question, what can I do to identify its use? I wouldn't trust any AI detector tool. There have been a few of those out there in the world that have professed to be able to detect AI. They cannot. They are actually usually very inequitable. They severely afflict students who use English as an additional language. And so I wouldn't trust any of those automated tools. Instead, I would try to design assessments that require students to talk about things that, again, that the model can't. And so it might be an example that you talked about in class, right? And the model can't necessarily easily discuss that. Or again, real world experience. But that example of like detailed writing-based assignments in online courses is like where the heart of this issue is. It's the best use case problem.
There's a comment there that just says, that's why I'm digging into generative tech, has also got me thinking about student and instructor workload, which is quite a touchy point now more than ever. I feel like we need to be having both of these conversations together. Just before that, Jill asked, do you have a sample of that table filled out? I think you may have replied with your email.
I didn't reply directly. That's for anybody. So rmurphy@monday.ca, you can reach me. But for any of this stuff, I can send you the slides or whatever is necessary. To Jill's question, I don't. It's very, very new stuff. I was just thinking about this the past couple of weeks. And this is like, again, my call out for collaborators. I want to fill in that table. I think it would be a great resource to have for evaluators. So if you're interested in helping me develop it, then reach out and we can work together. Otherwise, I'll find a time to develop it and share it at another session sometime.
Yeah, there's another person there who would like to speak.
Mark.
Yeah, I'm glad I was able to watch this because I think when you gave it, I was going to Cornerbrook, oddly enough, so I didn't see it.
Right.
Yeah, so I teach a graduate course, also writing based, and much like Jeff, they have to, research something and write about something to prove that they understand a topic. Try to show them the concepts of research and such. And I just had 3 instances of misconduct that I had to report because the students had plagiarized, not using AI, just traditional plagiarism, for which 2 of those 3 students received zeros. And the problem that I'm facing now is that I know other students had probably used AI and they might have potentially done less work than the students who plagiarized using traditional methods. And those students, while they didn't get a good mark because I tried to make my assignment AI resistant, they did still get some marks. So does this mean that because we can't prove that they're using AI, we shouldn't be treating traditional plagiarism as harshly as we had before? I don't know where I'm going with this because that's what it feels like to me and it feels wrong. So what should I do?
Well, you're the one who I know that you presented on AI ethics at the FBA recently, so you're probably better equipped to answer what should I do than I am. But all I can say is that this is where the conversation is. Like, are we in a world now where we should be letting people use AI in that kind of a way and just like upping the ante in terms of what we expect from students, right? That has its own inequities. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I'm open to other ideas from the room, from the audience.
At the very least, I'm glad we have the same answer.
Yeah, that's right. Jana, did you want to speak to any of your comments in the chat? If you're able to unmute.
Myself, I was doing another company. It has this new platform called Authorship, and Mark actually is the one who introduced it to me. But it's the instructor can use surveillance to see how much the student has cut and pasted or where it's come from online sources or whatever. I haven't used it yet. I don't like that we're kind of chasing one technological thing with another technological thing, but I'm very tempted to try it out. They're looking for people to try it out. And the idea is to give everybody like the equal footing of, well, let's use this platform to write. And then if I need to spot check stuff, then I can. But again, it just makes me feel so uncomfortable in terms of, is this where we're at now in post-secondary education?
That's right. We're digging in every time we up the ante in the arms race. We I think trust our students a little bit less, right? And that's an uncomfortable thing. I will also add, this is why I love my scenarios work, because from a bootleg AI perspective, I could get around that. I have a macro generator or a macro tool on my Mac. A macro is an automation I could tell it to take a set of text and then insert that text by typing. And so it would like take text that has been pasted and then fake the typing part, right? And that is trivial to do. So again, I don't know, maybe Grammarly's smarter than automation tools, but then that's that arms race, right? People who are really clever and want to put more work into cheating than actually doing the work will find a way to do that. So I'm equally uncomfortable with these kinds of arms race issues. The other thing that I will add is one thing that Grammarly does do really interestingly, and IA Writer on, actually they're on Windows now, so it's a writing app, does this as well, is it tries to let students and encourage students to use AI-based tools, but it keeps it keeps where this text came from really clear. And IA Writer, in fact, has this big blog post out that says, like, yes, use AI, insert the text in, but make it very clear which parts are AI based, and then it encourages you to naturally want to rewrite that to make it your own. And so that's one of the examples of becoming more intertwined with these tools that I kind of like. Is like, can we develop user interfaces such as really clearly labeling when text has come straight from AI? So that students are encouraged to use it to advance their work, and then also to rework that so it becomes their own. So there's some potential in that kind of dovetailing.